a lowly dishwasher, with a sick kid, thinks she can season my Michelin-starred broth. The arrogant head chef roared as he hurled the steaming pot of stock right into the industrial sink. Boiling splashes hit Grace's arms. She cried out and crashed hard onto the wet tile floor. She scrambled backward while clutching her red and blistered wrist and against her chest. Before the chef could take another step toward her, a pair of heavy work boots planted themselves firmly between them. It was the new warehouse inspector. His uniform was stained with flour and grease, but the look in his eyes was cold and carried a terrifying kind of authority. He looked down at Grace, before slowly raising his gaze to the chef. True value isn't found in a fancy title or an expensive chef's coat. It is found in raw talent, hard work, and a sincere heart. If you believe that too, leave a comment below saying, "I believe in the value of a pure soul," and make sure to subscribe to the channel so you never miss these incredible journeys. Let's rewind this nightmare. Just a few hours. Grace's hands were raw and cracked from endless nights submerged in harsh industrial degreaser. She was the bottom of the food chain at the Grand Oakhaven, a hyper-exclusive restaurant catering only to the city's elite. She didn't have a culinary degree from France. She didn't have a spotless resume or friends in high places. What she did have was a stack of final notice medical bills sitting on her kitchen counter. Her little sister, Lily, was lying in a hospital bed across town, waiting for a surgery that Grace couldn't even begin to afford. Every time her cheap prepaid phone buzzed in her apron pocket, her heart dropped. She was terrified it was the hospital calling to collect. So Grace scrubbed the cast iron pans a little harder. She swallowed every insult, every demeaning joke, and every scrap of abuse head chef Julian threw at her. She simply could not afford to lose this minimum wage lifeline, but Grace had a secret that nobody in that kitchen knew. She possessed a once-in-a-generation palate. She had a gift so precise that she could walk into a bustling kitchen and tell you exactly how much time was missing from a sauce just by breathing in the ambient steam. She knew intuitively when a cut of Wagyu was a single day past its absolute prime. She knew exactly when a heavy broth needed just a few drops of citrus to cut through the fat and sing on the tongue. It was a brilliant and natural talent. But she kept it buried under mountains of dirty plates and soapy water. Because in this kitchen, opinions from the dish pit got you fired. Earlier that evening, a quiet older man had walked through the kitchen doors. He wore a standard-issue maintenance jumpsuit and carried a clipboard. He introduced himself as Edward, a new guy sent down to audit the dry storage inventory. Nobody paid him any mind. Julian actually shoved past him and called him a useless old geezer for moving too slow. Edward just smiled politely, jotted something down on his clipboard, and went into the pantry. Grace was the only one who offered him a glass of ice water. She noticed he looked tired. She kindly told him to watch his step near the slippery floor drains. Edward thanked her, his sharp eyes lingering on the old burns and cuts covering her forearms. Tonight, the tension in the kitchen was suffocating. Word had just come down from the general manager that a mystery VIP was dining in the private hall. This wasn't just a local food critic. The rumor mill said it was someone from the corporate upper echelon, maybe even a major investor. Head chef Julian was pacing the line like a caged animal. He was a man famous for his explosive temper, not his consistency under pressure. In his frantic rush to impress the VIP, he completely lost his focus. He accidentally scorched the base of his signature reduction sauce. The smell of burnt shallots and bitter garlic filled the air. Realizing his fatal mistake, Julian panicked. Instead of starting over, he tried to cover it up. He aggressively dumped in a massive pour of cheap synthetic truffle oil. He hoped the overpowering scent would mask the burnt flavor. The result was a toxic and acrid mess. "Just plate it and serve it," Julian hissed at his terrified sous chefs, while wiping a bead of sweat from his forehead. "Drown the protein in it, because those corporate suits don't have real taste buds anyway. They just eat the price tag." Grace was scrubbing a baking sheet a few feet away. Her heart pounded heavily against her ribs. She could smell the disaster from across the room. She knew that sauce was dead. It was bitter, unbalanced, and offensive to the palate. She also knew exactly how to revive it. When Julian stormed into the walk-in cooler to scream at a supplier over the phone, Grace couldn't stop herself. Her instinct to protect the food overpowered her fear of the chef. She dropped her sponge, wiped her hands on her apron, and rushed over to the simmering pot. She didn't think about the consequences. She grabbed a handful of fresh parsley, crushed it to release the oils, and tossed it in. She reached for a bottle of apple cider vinegar, adding just a tiny measured splash to cut through the heavy truffle flavor. Finally, she balanced the bitterness with a pinch of smoked sea salt and white pepper. She whisked it together with rapid and fluid movements. Within seconds, the harsh chemical smell evaporated. The aroma immediately mellowed out and transformed into something rich, earthy, and deeply complex. It was perfect. But just as she set the whisk down, the heavy metal door of the walk-in cooler swung open. Julian stood there, staring at her, his face drained of color, before rapidly shifting to an ugly and dangerous shade of purple. He didn't care that the air suddenly smelled like a true Michelin-star kitchen. He didn't care that she had just saved his career. All he saw was a filthy and uneducated dishwasher, touching his masterpiece. And that brings us right back to the moment the pot went flying. The heavy work boots stepped firmly onto the wet tile, placing themselves right between Grace and the raging chef. Julian stopped dead in his tracks, his face twisted into an ugly sneer as he looked the man up and down. "Get out of my way, you useless old janitor. This filthy little rat just ruined my entire service and contaminated my kitchen." Edward didn't move a single inch. His posture was incredibly relaxed, yet he commanded the space like a seasoned general on a battlefield. He slowly reached down and picked up a clean-tasting spoon from the prep counter. He crouched down near the tipped pot and scooped up a small amount of the sauce that had pooled on a clean cutting board. Julian let out a loud, mocking laugh. "What are you doing, old man? You want a taste of the garbage she just made? Go ahead. Drink it up." Edward ignored the taunt. He brought the spoon to his lips and tasted the sauce. He closed his eyes. The entire kitchen went completely dead silent. You could hear the hum of the refrigerators and the rapid, terrified breathing coming from the dish pit. When Edward finally opened his eyes, he looked directly past Julian and locked eyes with Grace. His voice was deep, steady, and filled with genuine awe. "You balanced the bitter acidity of the scorched shallots with a microdose of apple cider vinegar, and you used the fresh, raw oils from the crushed parsley to completely neutralize the overwhelming taste of that cheap synthetic truffle. It is absolute perfection. It is balanced, complex, and incredibly brave." Julian scoffed, throwing his hands up in the air. "She didn't do anything. That is my recipe. I saved it. She just threw weeds into it and almost ruined everything." Edward finally turned his cold, piercing gaze toward the head chef. "Your recipe was dead 30 minutes ago, Julian. I watched you panic. I watched you dump half a bottle of industrial truffle oil into the pot to cover up your amateur mistake. I was standing right outside the walk-in cooler the entire time." Julian's face flushed a deep, furious red. "Who the hell do you think you are? You are a glorified mop boy. Security. Get this crazy old man and this worthless dishwasher out of my restaurant right now." Edward slowly reached into the breast pocket of his grease-stained maintenance jumpsuit. He pulled out a sleek, solid black titanium card. He tossed it onto the stainless steel prep table. It landed with a heavy, authoritative clink. At that exact moment, the restaurant's general manager burst through the double doors. Having heard the screaming from the dining room, he took one look at the man in the jumpsuit, looked at the black card on the table, and stopped completely dead in his tracks. All the blood rushed out of the manager's face. "Mr. Sterling," the manager stammers, his voice cracking with sheer terror, as he bowed his head. "I am so sorry. I didn't realize you had already arrived on the property. Julian froze. The color drained entirely from his face, leaving him looking like a ghost. Sterling. As in Edward Sterling, the billionaire founder and sole owner of the global Oakhaven Hospitality Group. The mystery VIP wasn't sitting out there in the private dining hall, waiting for a fancy meal. He had been quietly sweeping the pantry floors, taking out the trash, and watching his staff's true colors show all evening. Just when the darkness closes in, the light of truth always finds a way to shine. If you are glad to see justice served today, write down the words, "I believe in the value of a pure soul." In the comments right now, Edward took off his dirty canvas cap and dropped it on the counter. Julian, you lack vision. You lack integrity. But most importantly, you lack basic human respect for the very people who break their backs to keep this place running. Mr. Sterling, please, I can explain everything. Julian begged, his previous arrogance completely vanished, replaced by desperate, pathetic pleading. "You are fired," Edward said, his voice leaving absolutely no room for debate. "Pack your knives and get out of my building, and my legal team will be contacting you in the morning regarding the synthetic, cut-rate ingredients you have been secretly charging me premium prices for." Two burly security guards, who had just arrived, grabbed the disgraced chef by the arms and escorted him out of the kitchen. The entire staff watched in stunned silence as the tyrant was finally removed. Edward turned his back on the door and walked over to Grace. She was still sitting on the wet floor, shaking slightly, clutching her red and blistered wrist. Without a second thought for his own clothes, the billionaire knelt down right there, in the spilled broth and soapy water. He gently offered her his hand and helped her to her feet. "What is your name?" he asked softly. "Grace," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Grace, you possess a once-in-a-generation gift, a palate that chefs spend their entire lives trying to develop. Why in the world are you hiding back here washing dishes?" The floodgates opened. Grace couldn't hold it back anymore. Through broken sobs, she told him everything. She told him about Lily, about the crushing mountain of hospital bills, about needing the basic health insurance that came with this awful, abusive job, just to keep her little sister alive. Edward listened quietly, his eyes softening with deep empathy. When she finally finished, he gave a slow, respectful nod. "You don't just have a brilliant culinary mind, Grace, you have a fierce and resilient heart. And that is something I can never teach in any culinary school." He stood up and looked directly at the pale general manager. "As of this exact moment, Grace is the new executive culinary director of this entire location. Give her the keys to the office, and get my private medical director on the phone immediately. We are transferring her sister to the Sterling Medical Pavilion tonight. Every single medical expense is covered by the company." From this day forward, Grace collapsed to her knees again, but this time, she wasn't pushed down by cruelty. She fell under the overwhelming weight of pure relief and profound gratitude. The impossible burden she had been carrying alone for so long was finally lifted. When those tears of joy hit the floor, you know it was all worth the struggle. If your heart feels full, seeing Grace finally get the reward she deserves, please comment. I believe in the value of a pure soul. Fast forward. 2 weeks later, the atmosphere inside the kitchen at the Grand Oakhaven was completely transformed. There was no more screaming. There was no more fear. There was just the beautiful, harmonious rhythm of a dedicated team working together under Grace's steady, compassionate leadership. But right now, Grace wasn't on the line. She was sitting in a bright, beautiful, sunlit room in the best hospital in the state. Lily was sitting up in bed. She had color in her cheeks and a bright spark in her eyes. For the first time in months, Grace gently blew on a spoonful of rich, fragrant herbal broth and fed it to her little sister. Lily smiled a wide, beautiful smile. "It is the best soup in the whole world, Gracie." Grace smiled back, gently wiping a tear from her own cheek. The most incredible flavors in this life do not come from expensive luxury ingredients or arrogant, empty titles. They come from the warmth, the struggle, and the deep, abiding love of a truly pure heart. Those who plant seeds of kindness in the darkest dirt will always harvest miracles in the light. Hit that subscribe button to join our family, and leave one last comment saying, "I believe in the value of a pure soul," to help warm up the world today. I will see you in the next story.